The gunshot echoed across the canyon just as Yates Emerson spotted the woman standing in the middle of the dusty trail, her dress torn and her face sunburned, clutching what appeared to be a map in her trembling hands. He pulled his mare to a halt, dust swirling around the horse's hooves as he studied the figure before him. The Arizona Territory stretched endlessly in all directions, and finding another soul out here in the wilderness between Williams and Flagstaff was rare enough, but finding a woman alone was downright peculiar. The year was 1884, and these lands were unforgiving to anyone who did not know their way. "Madam," Yates called out, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his hip, though not near his revolver. He was a cautious man, but not one to threaten a lady in distress. "You all right there?" The woman looked up, her green eyes blazing with determination despite the obvious exhaustion etched into her features. She could not have been more than 22 years old, with auburn hair that had mostly escaped its pins and now hung in waves around her shoulders. Her dress, once a fine traveling outfit of deep blue cotton, was covered in dust and showed signs of having caught on desert brush. "I'm lost but not giving up," she declared, her voice strong despite her circumstances. She held up the map, which fluttered in the hot desert wind. "This map is supposed to lead me to my uncle's ranch, but I think I took a wrong turn somewhere back near the canyon." Yates dismounted and approached slowly, his boots crunching on the rocky ground. He was a tall man of 26, lean and weathered from years of working cattle drives and riding fence lines. His dark brown hair needed cutting, and his jaw bore several days' worth of stubble, but his eyes were kind as he looked at the lost woman. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the map. She hesitated only a moment before handing it over. Her fingers brushed his, and he noticed they were raw and blistered, likely from walking and trying to navigate rough terrain. Yates studied the hand-drawn map, his brow furrowing. "This is old," he said carefully. "Real old. The landmarks here, some of them do not exist anymore, and this trail," he pointed to a dotted line, "washed out in a flood 3 years back." The woman's shoulders sagged slightly, but she lifted her chin. "Then I will find another way. My Uncle Gerard is expecting me." He wrote that he had built a ranch somewhere in this territory and needed family. "I came all the way from St. Louis on the railroad, then by stage-coach to Williams, and then I hired a man with a wagon to take me the rest of the way. But he got spooked by what he said were Apache scouts and left me behind 2 days ago." 2 days. Yates's voice sharpened with concern. "You have been out here alone for 2 days. I had some water and provisions," she said defensively, "and I found a small spring yesterday. I am quite capable of taking care of myself." "I do not doubt that, madam," Yates said, handing back the map. "But capable or not, this desert kills folks who know what they are doing." "What's your name?" "Julia Garrison," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "And yours?" "Yates Emerson. I run cattle between here and the high country. Been out checking on some strays." He paused, considering his options. He had supplies for another week and no pressing business calling him back to Williams. "Your uncle, what's his full name?" "Gerard Garrison." He wrote that his ranch was near a place called Oak Creek. Yates nodded slowly. "I know the area. Oak Creek runs through some pretty country about 30 miles north of here. There are several homesteads and small ranches scattered through there. I have not heard the name Garrison, but folks come and go, file claims and build. If your uncle is there, we will find him." "We?" Julia asked, hope lighting her features. "Well, I cannot very well leave you out here to wander until the buzzards take an interest," Yates said, and for the first time, a small smile tugged at his lips. "But I need to know, Miss Garrison, can you ride?" "I grew up around horses," Julia said, "though I admit it has been some time." Yates walked back to his mare, a sturdy buckskin named Sage, and untied his bedroll and saddlebags. We will need to travel light and share the horse until we can get you properly outfitted. There is a trading post about 15 miles east, run by a man named Chester Cole. We can stop there, get you some proper clothes for riding and another mount. Julia looked down at her ruined dress. I'm afraid I do not have much money left. The man who abandoned me took most of what I had, claiming it was payment for bringing me as far as he did. Anger flickered through Yates, but he kept his voice calm. Did you get his name? He said it was Morton, but I suspect that was a lie. Everything about him turned out to be a lie. Well, do not worry about the money for now, Yates said. Chester owes me a favor or two. We will work something out. He helped Julia mount Sage, then swung up behind her. She stiffened slightly at the close contact, but necessity overrode propriety. Yates kept his manner respectful, making sure she was comfortable before urging the mare forward at a steady walk. The sun climbed higher as they traveled, and Yates offered Julia his canteen regularly. She drank sparingly, clearly aware that water was precious out here. As they rode, he found himself telling her about the territory, pointing out landmarks and explaining the different types of vegetation and wildlife they passed. That is a palo verde tree, he said, indicating a green bark tree with tiny leaves. And those plants there with the red flowers, that is Indian paintbrush. The Apache use it for dye and medicine. You know a lot about this land, Julia observed. I have been out here since I was 18, Yates said. Came west after my parents died of fever back in Kansas. Figured I could make something of myself out here in the territories. It is hard land, but it is honest. You know where you stand. And where do you stand? Julia asked. Right now, hoping to save enough to buy my own ranch. Been working for the Triple Bar outfit for the last 3 years, drawing good pay and learning the business. Another year or two, and I will have enough to file a claim and start building something that is mine. Julia was quiet for a moment, then said, My uncle wrote the same kind of things in his letters, that the West was a place where a person could build a future with their own hands. That is why I came, even though everyone in St. Louis said I was crazy. Why were you in St. Louis? Yates asked. You said you came from there, but the way you talk, you are not from there originally. No, I grew up in Ohio, Julia explained. Small town outside Cincinnati. My parents died when I was 16, cholera. I went to live with my aunt in St. Louis, but she passed last year. Uncle Gerard is my only living relative, and when he wrote offering me a home, I took my inheritance, small as it was, and headed west. That took courage, Yates said, meaning it. Or foolishness, Julia replied, but he could hear the smile in her voice. I suppose time will tell which one. They rode in companionable silence for a while, and Yates found himself acutely aware of Julia sitting in front of him. The faint scent of her hair despite the dust and the desert sun, the way she sat straight despite her exhaustion. There was something about her determination, her refusal to give up even when circumstances had turned against her, that resonated with something deep inside him. The trading post appeared as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. It was a rough structure of adobe and timber, with a corral holding a few horses and mules. A hand-painted sign declared it to be Cole's Trading Post and Goods. Chester Cole came out as they approached, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a wild gray beard and sharp eyes. Yates Emerson, he called out. Figured you were still up in the high country. Plans changed, Yates said, dismounting and then helping Julia down. She swayed slightly and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Chester, this is Miss Julia Garrison. She needs outfitting for travel. Proper riding clothes, boots if you have them in her size, and we need another horse. Chester looked Julia over with a practiced eye. "I got some clothes that might work. Had a woman pass through last month, traded some things. And I got a little sorrel mare that is gentle and sure-footed." He paused. "But Yates, you know I run a business here." "I know," Yates said. "Remember that time I helped track down those rustlers who stole your mules?" "I do," Chester admitted. "And remember how I did not ask for the reward money that was offered?" Chester sighed. "You are calling in that favor now?" "I am," Yates confirmed. "But not all of it. Miss Garrison will work off her debt once she is settled with her uncle. You have my word on that." Julia stepped forward. "I appreciate the help, but I will not have debts following me. I can work. I can cook, clean, handle accounts, whatever needs doing to pay my way." Chester looked between them and finally nodded. "All right. Come on inside, Miss Garrison. Let us see what we can find for you." An hour later, Julia emerged from the trading post looking like a different person. She wore a split riding skirt of sturdy brown canvas, a simple white cotton shirt, and a leather vest. Proper boots covered her feet, and Chester had thrown in a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. Her hair was braided down her back, practical and neat. Yates found himself staring, and Julia caught him looking. "Is something wrong?" she asked, a hint of self-consciousness in her voice. "No," Yates said quickly. "You look ready to ride, that is all." The sorrel mare was indeed gentle, and Julia proved her earlier claim about growing up around horses. She mounted smoothly and settled into the saddle with evident relief at having her own horse. "We will camp a few hours north of here," Yates said as they prepared to leave. "Get a fresh start in the morning. Oak Creek is still a good day's ride from here, maybe more depending on the trail." They made camp that evening in a sheltered spot beneath a stand of cottonwood trees. A small stream provided water, and Yates built a fire while Julia tended to the horses. They worked together with an ease that surprised them both, falling into a natural rhythm as if they had been traveling companions for much longer than a single day. Over a simple meal of beans and salt pork, with coffee boiled in a battered tin pot, they talked more. Julia told him about her childhood in Ohio, about helping her father in his small dry goods store and learning to read and figure accounts at her mother's knee. Yates shared stories of his early days in the territory, the mistakes he had made and the lessons he had learned. "I spent my first winter out here half-starved because I did not know how to read the weather," Yates admitted. "Got snowed in up in the mountains with barely any supplies. Would have died if a trapper named Bill Hawkins had not found my camp and shared his provisions." "What happened to him?" Julia asked. "He is still out there, far as I know," Yates said. "Lives in the high country, only comes down a few times a year to trade pelts. He taught me how to survive out here, really survive. Taught me to respect the land and the people who were here long before we came." "The Apache," Julia said quietly. Yates nodded. "And others. This is their home. We are the newcomers, no matter what the government in Washington says about territories and states. I have found that if you treat folks with respect, most will return it. There is enough land and sky out here for everyone, if people would just see that." Julia looked at him in the firelight, seeing not just a cowboy who had helped her, but a man with depth and principle. "Not everyone thinks that way," she said. "No," Yates agreed. "And that is why there is trouble. But I figure all I can do is live according to my own code and hope that counts for something." That night, Yates gave Julia his bedroll and took first watch, sitting by the fire with his rifle across his knees. The desert night was alive with sounds, the yip of coyotes in the distance and the rustle of small creatures in the brush. Above, the stars blazed in impossible numbers, a sight that still took his breath away even after all his years in the territory. He thought about Julia sleeping nearby, about the determination in her eyes and the strength in her voice when she had said she was lost but not giving up. There was something about her that had gotten under his skin in a way he had not expected. He had known pretty women before, had even courted a girl in Williams for a few months last year, but nothing had come of it. She had wanted a man who would stay close to town, and he needed the open range. They had parted on friendly terms, acknowledging they wanted different lives. But Julia, she had come west seeking something, same as he had. She understood what it meant to leave everything behind and start fresh. That understanding created a connection he felt deeply, even though they had known each other less than a day. "You are thinking awfully hard over there," Julia's voice came softly from the darkness. "I can almost hear it." Yates turned to see her sitting up in the bedroll, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the desert chill. "Could not sleep?" he asked. "I did for a while," Julia said. "But I am not used to sleeping on the ground. Back in St. Louis I had a proper bed with a feather mattress." She paused. "I do not miss it as much as I thought I would." "Come sit by the fire," Yates invited. "Might as well keep me company during watch." Julia rose and came to sit beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence but maintaining a proper distance. "Tell me about Oak Creek," she said. "What should I expect when we get there?" "It is beautiful country," Yates said, his voice taking on the tone of someone describing a beloved place. "The creek runs clear and cold, fed by snowmelt from the high country. There are sycamore trees growing along the banks, and the canyon walls rise up red and gold. Folks who settle there are mostly ranchers and farmers trying to make a go of it. Some succeed, some do not. It takes a particular kind of stubbornness to make it out here." "I think I have that kind of stubbornness," Julia said. "I think you do too," Yates agreed, and their eyes met in the firelight. Something passed between them then, an acknowledgement of connection, of possibility. Julia looked away first, but not before Yates saw the blush rise in her cheeks. "We should both try to get some sleep," she said, rising. "Long day tomorrow, Julia," Yates said, and she paused. "I am glad I found you on that trail, glad I could help." She smiled, and it transformed her tired face into something luminous. "So am I, Yates, more than you know." They set out at first light, after a quick breakfast of leftover biscuits from the trading post and strong coffee. The horses were fresh and moved at a good pace, and Yates estimated they would reach Oak Creek by late afternoon if they pushed a bit. The landscape changed as they traveled north, becoming greener as they gained elevation. Pine trees appeared among the juniper and sage, and the air grew cooler. Julia exclaimed over the beauty of it, her face alight with wonder as they rounded a bend and caught sight of the red rock formations that characterized this part of the territory. "It is like something from a painting," she said. "I never imagined anything could be so beautiful and so wild at the same time." They stopped to water the horses at a small creek, and while the animals drank, Yates pulled out Julia's map again. "Your uncle marked this area here," he said, pointing. "If I am reading this right, and accounting for the changes I know about, his ranch should be about 5 miles beyond the main settlement near Oak Creek. There is a box canyon in that area with good water and grazing. It would be a smart place to build." "How much farther?" Julia asked. "Few more hours," Yates said. "We are making good time." They remounted and continued on, following a wagon track that showed evidence of regular use. As they rode, they passed a few other travelers, all of whom greeted them with nods and calls. Yates exchanged news with a freighter hauling supplies north and learned that there was a new family who had recently settled near Oak Creek. "Man named Garrison," the freighter said. "Built himself a right nice place from what I heard. Brought in good breeding stock, planning to raise horses." Julia's face lit up at this confirmation that her uncle was indeed there. "That is him," she said excitedly. Uncle Gerard always wrote about horses in his letters. The sun was lowering toward the western horizon when they finally arrived at Oak Creek. The settlement was small, just a handful of buildings clustered near the creek crossing. There was a general store, a smithy, a small church, and what looked like a boarding house. A few scattered houses dotted the surrounding area, and beyond them, the land opened up into a wide valley surrounded by red cliffs and pine-covered hills. "The Garrison place is up that way," Yates said, pointing to a track that led northwest along the creek. "But it is getting late. We could stay in the settlement tonight, head out to your uncle's place in the morning when we are fresh." Julia shook her head firmly. "No, I have waited long enough. I need to see him to know I have finally made it." Yates understood. "All right then. Let us go find your uncle." They followed the track as it wound alongside the creek, the sound of running water accompanying them. The land here was lush by desert standards, with grass for grazing and stands of trees providing shade. Yates could see why someone would choose to build here, and he felt a pang of envy, imagining what it would be like to have land like this to call his own. The sun was painting the sky orange and pink when they spotted the ranch. It sat in a natural amphitheater formed by red rock cliffs, with the creek running through the property. There was a sturdy log house, smoke rising from its chimney, and a well-built barn with corrals holding several horses. Even from a distance, Yates could tell it was a well-managed operation. "That is it," Julia breathed. "It has to be." They rode up the track toward the house, and a dog began barking, announcing their arrival. A man emerged from the barn, tall and lean with gray-shot dark hair and a weathered face. He was in his 50s, Yates guessed, and moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew his land. "Can I help you folks?" the man called out, his hand resting casually on his belt near a holstered pistol. Julia urged her horse forward. "Uncle Gerard, it is me, Julia." The man's face went through a remarkable transformation, from wariness to shock to joy in the space of a heartbeat. "Julia, little Julia, but I did not expect you for another month at least." "I caught an earlier train," Julia said, dismounting quickly and hurrying toward him. "Your letter said to come as soon as I could, so I did." Gerard Garrison caught his niece in a fierce hug, and Yates saw tears in the older man's eyes as he held her. "I cannot believe you are here," Gerard said, his voice rough with emotion. "After all these years, family finally." Yates dismounted and stood back, not wanting to intrude on the reunion, but Gerard noticed him and extended a hand. "I am Gerard Garrison, and I owe you my thanks for seeing my niece safely here. These are not easy roads for a woman traveling alone." "Yates Emerson," Yates said, shaking the offered hand, "and I am glad I could help. Your niece is a determined woman. She would have made it here one way or another." "Come inside, both of you," Gerard insisted. "You must be hungry and tired." "I want to hear everything, Julia, how you made the journey, what happened that you arrived early." Inside, the ranch house was comfortable and well-appointed. Gerard clearly had means and taste, with sturdy furniture and even some books on a shelf. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, and a pot of stew bubbled over it, filling the air with savory aromas. Over the meal, Julia told her uncle about her journey, about the man who had abandoned her and how Yates had found her in the desert. Gerard's face darkened when he heard about Morton. "I will ask around," Gerard said. "A man like that should not be allowed to prey on travelers, but thank God you are safe now, Julia. This is your home for as long as you want it." "I want to stay," Julia said firmly. "I want to help you build this ranch. I can keep accounts and I can learn whatever else needs doing." Gerard smiled. "There is plenty that needs doing, I promise you that. But first, you need rest. We can talk about everything else tomorrow." He turned to Yates. And you, young man, I insist you stay the night. It is too dark to ride back to the settlement safely, and besides, I would like to talk more with the man who helped my niece. I am a good judge of character and I see something in you." Yates started to protest, but Gerard waved him off. "I will not hear any argument. The barn has a comfortable tack room you can use, and in the morning I will send you off with a proper breakfast." That night, lying in the tack room on a surprisingly comfortable cot, Yates found himself wide awake despite his exhaustion. Through the window, he could see the house, could see lamplight in one of the windows. Was that Julia's room? Was she awake too, thinking about the journey that had brought her here? He knew he should ride out in the morning and head back to Williams, back to his job with the triple bar. But the thought of leaving Julia behind created an unexpected ache in his chest. They had only known each other a matter of days, but something had formed between them during that time, something real and strong. The next morning, Gerard insisted Yates stay for breakfast, and the three of them sat around the rough-hewn table eating eggs, biscuits, and fried potatoes. The conversation flowed easily, and Yates found himself liking Gerard Garrison. The older man was clearly educated but practical, a good combination for making a success out here. "Yates, I have a proposition for you," Gerard said as they finished eating. "Julia tells me you are working for the Triple Bar outfit, saving to start your own ranch." "That is right," Yates confirmed cautiously. "Well, I need help here," Gerard said bluntly. "I am building up the horse herd and I need someone who knows the land and the livestock, someone I can trust. I can offer you a partnership, 20% of the operation in exchange for your labor and expertise. In 5 years, if things go well, that could be worth more than the spread you could buy on your own." Yates sat back, stunned. It was a generous offer, more than generous. "Mr. Garrison, I appreciate the offer, but we barely know each other. Why would you make this kind of deal with a stranger?" "Because you are not a stranger," Gerard said. "You proved what kind of man you are when you helped Julia. You could have ridden past her, or you could have taken advantage of her situation. Instead, you went out of your way to see her safely here, even calling in favors on her behalf. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He paused, then added, "And because I am not getting any younger, I need to build something here and I need help to do it. Julia is family and she will inherit this place when I am gone, but she needs someone who knows ranching to help make this work. I think you could be that someone." Yates looked at Julia, who had been quiet during this exchange. Her face was carefully neutral, but he could see something in her eyes, a hope perhaps, or maybe just curiosity about what he would decide. "Can I have some time to think about it?" Yates asked. "This is not a small decision." "Of course," Gerard said. "Take a few days. Ride back to Williams, settle your affairs with the Triple Bar if you decide to accept. The offer stands." Yates did ride back to Williams that day, but his mind was spinning with possibilities the entire journey. A partnership in a growing ranch, a chance to build something real, and if he was honest with himself, the opportunity to stay near Julia. He had known her such a short time, but every moment with her had felt right in a way nothing else in his life ever had. In Williams, he went directly to the Triple Bar Ranch headquarters and found the foreman, a gruff man named Sam Tucker. Yates explained the situation, and to his surprise, Sam was understanding. "I figured we would lose you sooner or later, Yates," Sam said. "You are too good a hand to stay working for wages forever. If Garrison is offering you a partnership, you would be a fool not to take it. Give me 2 weeks to find a replacement, and we will call it square." Those 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and preparation. Yates settled his accounts, sold off the few possessions he did not need, and bought supplies for his new life. He sent word to Gerard that he was accepting the offer and received an enthusiastic reply welcoming him to the partnership. When he finally rode back to Oak Creek, his belongings packed on a mule he had bought for the purpose, it was early autumn and the aspens were starting to turn gold in the high country. The ranch looked even better than he remembered, and he felt a surge of excitement about the future. Gerard welcomed him warmly and showed him to a small cabin near the main house, a sturdy structure with a stove, a bed, and a table. "Built this last year thinking I might hire some help," Gerard explained. "Never got around to it until now. It is yours for as long as you need it." Julia appeared as Yates was unpacking, and he felt his heart jump at the sight of her. She had adapted to ranch life remarkably well in the short time since he had last seen her. Her face had lost its pallor and now glowed with health, and she moved with the confidence of someone who had found her place. "Welcome back," she said simply, but her smile was warm. "Thank you," Yates replied. "It is good to be here." The work began immediately, and Yates threw himself into it with enthusiasm. Gerard's vision for the ranch was ambitious, breeding quality horses for the growing demand from the Army and from other ranchers. They had good stock to start with, and Yates knew horses well enough to see the potential. But more than the work, Yates found himself drawn into the life of the small ranch. There were meals shared around the table, evenings spent planning and talking, and always Julia's presence, sometimes helping with the horses, sometimes keeping the accounts as she had promised, always there with a smile or a word. They fell into patterns together, Yates and Julia. He would find reasons to be near the house when he knew she would be working on the ledgers, and she would find reasons to come to the corrals when he was training horses. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other in the way people do when they are building towards something without quite admitting it yet. One evening in late October, after a long day of moving horses to winter pasture, Yates found Julia sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the red cliffs in shades of crimson and gold. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Please," Julia said, moving over to make room on the bench. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade and the stars begin to emerge. Finally, Julia spoke. "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" Yates asked. "For finding me that day on the trail. For not just helping me, but for seeing me safely here, for becoming part of this place." She turned to look at him. "You changed my life, Yates Emerson." "I think maybe you changed mine too," Yates said quietly. Their eyes met and held, and Yates saw his own feelings reflected back at him in Julia's gaze. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they separated, Julia was smiling. "I have wanted you to do that for weeks," she admitted. "Why did you not say anything?" Yates asked. "Because I wanted to be sure," Julia said. "Sure that this was real and not just gratitude or circumstance throwing us together, but I am sure now. Are you?" "I have been sure since the day I found you standing in that trail with your map in your hand, refusing to give up," Yates said. "I just did not know how to tell you." They talked long into the night about their feelings, their hopes, their dreams for the future. When they finally parted, it was with the understanding that something important had begun between them. Gerard noticed the change immediately, and his approval was evident. "I hoped this might happen," he admitted to Yates one morning as they worked together in the barn. "Julia is like a daughter to me, the only family I have left. I wanted to know she would be cared for, that she would have someone worthy of her. I think you are that someone, Yates." "I care for her deeply," Yates said. "More than I knew I could care for anyone." "Then do not wait too long to tell her so properly," Gerard advised with a smile. As autumn deepened into winter, The relationship between Yates and Julia grew stronger. They took rides together when work permitted, exploring the surrounding country. Yates showed her secret places he had discovered, hidden valleys and ancient ruins where people had lived long before. Julia shared her dreams for the ranch, ideas about expanding into cattle as well as horses, about building something that would last generations. The first snow fell in December, dusting the red cliffs with white and bringing a quiet beauty to the ranch. They had prepared well, with hay stored for the horses and supplies laid in for the winter. The work shifted to indoor tasks, maintaining equipment and planning for spring. On Christmas Eve, with a fire crackling in the hearth and snow falling softly outside, Yates asked Julia to marry him. He had fashioned a ring himself, working in secret in the smithy at the settlement, shaping silver into a simple band that caught the light beautifully. Julia said yes without hesitation, tears streaming down her face as she kissed him. Gerard shook Yates's hand with genuine warmth, clearly pleased by the development. They were married in March, when the snow had melted and the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom. The ceremony was held at the small church in the settlement, with Gerard standing as a witness and several of the neighboring ranchers attending. Julia wore a simple dress of pale yellow cotton that she had sewn herself, and Yates wore his best shirt and vest, his hair freshly cut for the occasion. The circuit preacher pronounced them man and wife, and when Yates kissed his bride, he felt a completeness he had never known before. This was what he had been searching for when he came west, not just land or success, but a sense of belonging, of home. They spent their first night as husband and wife in the cabin that had been Yates's, but it was now theirs. Julia had brought over her things during the day, and the space that had been purely functional now showed her touch, with curtains on the windows and a quilt on the bed that she had made during the winter. "Are you happy?" Yates asked as they lay together in the darkness, Julia nestled against his side. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Julia replied. "When I left St. Louis, I was hoping to find a home, family. I found so much more than that." "So did I," Yates said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "When I saw you on that trail with your map, looking lost but determined, I had no idea you would become my entire world." "I was lost," Julia said, "but I found my way. With your help, I found everything I needed." As spring turned to summer, the ranch thrived. The horses Gerard had been breeding were gaining a reputation for quality, and buyers came from as far away as California. Yates's knowledge of the land helped them expand their grazing territory, using high country meadows in summer and lower pastures in winter. Julia's management of the accounts kept them profitable, and her ideas about diversifying into cattle proved sound when they purchased their first breeding herd that fall. The partnership between Gerard and Yates worked smoothly, both men respecting each other's expertise and judgment. But more than business partners, they became family, connected by blood through Julia and by genuine affection born of shared work and goals. In late winter of their second year of marriage, Julia told Yates she was expecting a child. His joy was boundless, and Gerard was nearly as excited at the prospect of becoming a great uncle. They fussed over Julia, insisting she rest more and do less heavy work, but she laughed at their concern. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she declared. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still doing their work. I will be fine." And she was. Their son was born in early autumn, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him William, after the town where their story had truly begun. When Julia had arrived there on her journey west, Gerard held his great-nephew with trembling hands, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Family," he said softly. "I have real family again." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch, which they formally named the Garrison Emerson Ranch, continued to grow. They built a larger house, spacious enough for their growing family and for Gerard to have his own comfortable quarters. 2 years after William's birth, Julia gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, and 2 years after that, another son they called Thomas. Yates proved to have a natural talent not just for ranching but for understanding the changing times. When the railroad expanded its line closer to Oak Creek, he negotiated favorable shipping rates for their horses and cattle. When new settlers arrived in the territory, he befriended them, building relationships that proved valuable over the years. Julia became a pillar of the small community, organizing a school for the growing number of children in the area and teaching them reading and arithmetic. She never forgot what her own education had meant to her, and she was determined that the children of Oak Creek would have opportunities. Gerard lived to see his great-grandchildren grow, and he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, content in the knowledge that his ranch would continue under the care of people he loved. Yates and Julia mourned him deeply, but they took comfort in the legacy he had left them, not just land and livestock, but the values of hard work, integrity, and family. The Arizona Territory became a state in 1912, and by then, the Garrison Emerson Ranch was one of the most respected operations in the region. William, grown to manhood, took on increasing responsibility for the horse breeding program, while Sarah showed a head for business that made her invaluable in managing their expanding interests. Thomas, the youngest, developed a passion for improving their cattle herd through selective breeding. Yates and Julia watched their children grow and thrive with deep satisfaction. On summer evenings, they would sit together on the porch of the house they had built, looking out at the land they had shaped, and remember the beginning of their story. "You ever think about that day?" Julia asked one evening as the sun set behind the red cliffs, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Which day?" Yates asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "The day you found me on the trail, lost with my map in my hand." "I think about it often," Yates admitted. "I think about how easily I might have missed you, might have taken a different trail that day, and then none of this would exist." "But you did not miss me," Julia said, taking his hand. "You found me and you helped me and you loved me. That day changed both our lives." "You changed my life," Yates said. "You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just survival. You made me better than I was." "We made each other better," Julia corrected gently. "That is what love does." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and cattle lowed in the pastures. The sounds of the ranch, the sounds of the life they had built together. "Are you happy?" Yates asked, the same question he had asked on their wedding night all those years ago. "More than words can say," Julia replied, and it was true. From that day on the trail, when she had been lost but refusing to give up, to this moment surrounded by family and the fruits of their labor, her life had been more than she had dared to dream. Yates pulled her closer, and Julia rested her head on his shoulder. They had faced challenges over the years, droughts and hard winters, difficult births and childhood illnesses, the normal trials that come with building a life. But they had faced them together, and that had made all the difference. As they aged, Yates and Julia gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to their children, but they remained active and involved. Yates still spent mornings working with the horses, his touch as gentle and sure as ever despite the arthritis that sometimes troubled his hands. Julia still kept the accounts, her mind sharp and her head for figures undimmed by time. They became known throughout the region, not just for their successful ranch but for their generosity and fairness. They helped young couples starting out, offering advice and sometimes extending credit when times were hard. They employed men fairly and treated them with respect, earning loyalty in return. Grandchildren arrived in due time, and then great-grandchildren. The ranch house that Yates and Julia had built rang with the laughter of children on holidays and special occasions. Family gatherings became treasured traditions, with multiple generations coming together to celebrate and connect. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children organized a grand celebration. The entire community turned out, along with friends and family from across the state. There was music and dancing, stories shared and memories recounted. Yates and Julia stood together, his arm around her waist, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and respect. 50 years, Julia marveled later that night as they prepared for bed. Half a century since we stood in that little church and promised forever. Best decision I ever made, Yates said, and meant it with his whole heart. We have had a good life, Julia said. Better than I ever imagined possible when I was a lost girl with a map in her hand. You were never really lost, Yates said. You were finding your way home. It just took you longer than expected. Julia smiled at that, recognizing the truth in his words. She had been on a journey to find where she belonged, and she had found it, found him, found their life together. They continued on for many more years, watching the world change around them. Automobiles became common, replacing the horses and wagons they had known. The telephone lines reached Oak Creek, connecting them to the wider world. The ranch adapted and evolved, but its core remained the same, built on the foundation that Yates and Julia had laid all those years ago. Yates passed away peacefully at the age of 89, surrounded by his family. Julia held his hand as he slipped away, her eyes dry though her heart was breaking. They had known this day would come eventually, had talked about it quietly over the years. "I will love you forever," she whispered to him at the end. "In this life and whatever comes after, thank you for finding me." She thought she saw him smile, a gentle upturn of his lips before he took his last breath. Julia lived for 5 more years after Yates died, but she was never truly alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love, and the ranch continued to thrive under their management. She spent her final years recording the history of the ranch, writing down the stories so that future generations would know where they came from and what it had taken to build what they had. She wrote about that day when a cowboy had found her on a dusty trail, about how she had declared she was lost but not giving up. She wrote about falling in love, about building a life and a family, about the challenges they had overcome and the joys they had shared. On a warm spring morning, Julia passed away in her sleep, a peaceful end to a well-lived life. Her family mourned her deeply but celebrated her memory, knowing she had lived fully and loved completely. They buried her beside Yates on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could rest together in the land they had loved. The marker was simple stone, bearing their names and dates, and underneath, an inscription that William had chosen: "Lost and found, forever bound." The Garrison Emerson Ranch continued through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But it all traced back to that day in 1884 when a young cowboy had spotted a determined woman with a map in her hand, and everything had changed. Their great-great-grandchildren still told the story at family gatherings, keeping alive the memory of Yates and Julia, the cowboy and the woman who had refused to give up. It became part of the family legend, a reminder of where they came from and what mattered most: perseverance, love, and the courage to build something lasting. The ranch itself stood as a living monument to their love and labor. The buildings they had constructed had been replaced or modernized over the years, but the land remained, the red cliffs and the creek, the meadows where horses still grazed, the same sky full of stars that Yates and Julia had watched together so many evenings. In the ranch house, now home to William's grandson and his family, there hung a framed item in a place of honor. It was Julia's original map, the one she had been holding that day on the trail. The paper was yellowed and fragile now, the marks faded, but it was preserved carefully, a tangible connection to the beginning of it all. Beneath the map hung a photograph, one of the few taken of Yates and Julia together. It showed them in their later years, standing in front of the ranch house, his arm around her shoulders. They were both smiling, their faces lined with age but their eyes bright with contentment. Anyone who looked at that photograph could see the love between them, still strong after all those years. The current generation of the family made sure their children knew the stories, understood that the comfortable life they enjoyed had been built by people who had faced uncertainty with courage and determination. They taught them about Julia, who had come west with nothing but hope and a map, and about Yates, who had seen someone in need and chosen to help, never imagining where that choice would lead. On the anniversary of Yates and Julia's meeting, which the family had calculated as best they could from the journals Julia had kept, the family made it a tradition to gather at the gravesite on the hill. They would stand together, multiple generations, and someone would tell the story again, keeping it alive for the youngest members who had not heard it before. Once upon a time, they would begin. A cowboy was riding through the Arizona Territory when he spotted a woman standing in the middle of a dusty trail. And the children would listen, wide-eyed, as the story unfolded, the story of their ancestors, the story of love that had created the world they now inhabited. The land itself seemed to remember. The red cliffs that had witnessed the growth of the ranch stood unchanged, eternal in their beauty. The creek still ran clear and cold, following the same course it had when Garrison had first chosen this spot to build. The sky was still vast and filled with stars, the same stars that had shone down on Yates and Julia through all their years together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, those who were sensitive to such things claimed they could feel a presence on the hill where Yates and Julia rested. Not haunting, but watching over, two spirits content with what they had built, pleased to see their legacy continuing. The story of Yates and Julia became more than just family history. It became part of the larger story of Arizona, of the West, of all those people who had come seeking something better and had worked to build it. Their ranch was featured in books about the history of the territory, their photographs displayed in the local museum in what was now a much larger town of Oak Creek. Historians noted the unusual partnership between Garrison and Yates Emerson, praising it as an example of how the West had sometimes offered opportunities that would have been impossible in the more rigid society back east. They wrote about Julia's role in establishing education in the area, and about how the ranch had been a model of sustainable management in an often harsh environment. But for the family, it was always more personal than history. It was about two people who had found each other against impossible odds and had chosen to build a life together. It was about how a single act of kindness, Yates stopping to help a lost woman, had created ripples that extended through time, affecting hundreds of people over generations. The values that Yates and Julia had lived by became embedded in the family culture. Treat people fairly, work hard, do not give up when things get difficult, value family above wealth, and always help those in need. These were not just platitudes but lived principles, demonstrated again and again through the years. When the current patriarch of the family, William's great-grandson, was asked in an interview for a documentary about Arizona ranching families what the secret to their longevity was, he thought for a long moment before answering. "It goes back to my great-great-grandparents," he said. Yates and Julia. They understood something fundamental, that success is not just about what you build but about who you build it with and why you build it. They built this ranch as an expression of their love for each other and for the land. They built it to last, to pass on to future generations. Everything we do now is built on that foundation. He paused, then added, "And they taught us through their example that you do not have to start with much to end up with something meaningful." Julia arrived here with nothing but hope and determination. Yates had his skills and his willingness to work. Together, they created all of this. That is a powerful lesson, one we try to never forget. As the interview ended, he walked over to the window and looked out at the land stretching toward the red cliffs in the distance. The same view that Yates and Julia had loved, that had been their daily vista for so many years. He thought about them often, his ancestors whom he had never met, but felt he knew intimately through the stories and journals they had left behind. He felt the weight of responsibility, knowing he was a steward of their legacy, charged with preserving what they had built and passing it on intact to the next generation. But he also felt grateful, deeply grateful, for what they had given him. Not just the ranch and the financial security it provided, but the example of their lives, the proof that love and hard work and determination could build something that would outlast any individual lifetime. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, he walked up the hill to the gravesite. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a cool breeze brought the scent of pine and sage. He stood before the simple stone marker, hands in his pockets, and spoke quietly. "We are doing our best to honor what you built," he said, "to carry it forward in a way that would make you proud. Thank you for having the courage to start this, for finding each other, for not giving up. Everything we have, everything we are, starts with you too." He stood there a while longer, feeling a sense of peace, a feeling of connection across the decades. Then he turned and walked back down the hill, back to the house full of his own family, another generation in the continuing story that had begun on a dusty trail in 1884. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Spring brought new foals and calves, green grass in the meadows and wildflowers blooming across the hillsides. Summer brought long days of work under the hot sun, moving cattle and maintaining the property. Autumn brought the harvest of hay and the preparation for winter. Winter brought snow and quiet, a time for rest and planning for the year ahead. Through it all, the ranch endured, as Yates and Julia had built it to endure. Their love story had become quite literally the foundation of a lasting legacy. Proof that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we do not plan, and the most valuable treasures are the people we find along the way. In the ranch house, children played and learned, fought and made up, grew and changed. They were raised with the stories, with the knowledge of where they came from, with an understanding that they were part of something larger than themselves. They learned to ride and work cattle, to keep accounts and make decisions, to value education and treat people fairly. And when they were old enough to understand, they were taken up the hill to meet, in a sense, their ancestors. They were told the full story, shown the old photograph and the preserved map, and taught to appreciate the journey that had made their lives possible. "Remember," they were told, "you come from people who did not give up when things got hard. You come from people who found each other and built something beautiful together. Carry that with you, whatever you choose to do with your life." Most of them did carry it with them. Some stayed on the ranch, taking up the work and the legacy. Others went out into the wider world, becoming doctors and teachers, business people and artists, spreading across the country and even the world. But they carried the story with them, the story of Yates and Julia, and it shaped who they were and how they lived their lives. The ranch continued to evolve with changing times, incorporating new techniques and technologies while staying true to its core principles. But some things remained constant. The commitment to quality in their horses and cattle, the fair treatment of employees, the connection to the land and the community, the understanding that they were stewards of something precious that needed to be protected and preserved. And always at the center of it all was the love story of a cowboy and a woman with a map, two people who had found each other when she was lost, who had chosen each other when they could have walked away, who had built a life together that had rippled out to affect so many others. As the sun set on another day at the Garrison Emerson ranch, painting the red cliffs in shades of amber and gold, the current generation went about their evening routines. Children were called in from play, horses were checked one final time, doors were locked and lights turned on against the gathering darkness. And up on the hill, two simple headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of Yates Emerson and Julia Garrison Emerson. The stone had weathered over the years, but the names were still clear and the inscription still readable. Lost and found, forever bound. The wind whispered through the grass around the graves, and the stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky. The ranch settled into night, secure and peaceful, built on love, sustained by love, a testament to the power of two people who had refused to give up and had found in each other everything they needed. Their story was complete, their journey finished, but their legacy continued, living on in the land they had loved, in the family they had created, in the values they had embodied. They had started with almost nothing, just hope and determination and each other, and they had built something that would last far beyond their own years. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling and retelling, worth preserving for all the generations yet to come. The story of how a cowboy found a bride with a map in her hand, how she said she was lost but not giving up, and how together they found their way home,